Right now, somewhere in your home, there's a device keeping you from freezing to death tonight. You haven't thought about it in weeks, maybe months. It hums quietly in the background while you scroll, eat, and sleep without a single survival thought in your head. For 300,000 years, not a single one of your ancestors had that device. What they had instead was this: a brain running at full capacity under conditions designed to kill it, inventing solutions so clever that modern engineers are still copying them today. Your ancestors didn't just survive the Ice Age, they cracked it, one brutal winter at a time, with nothing but animal bones, fire, and a mind that refused to accept that the cold had already won. And when you understand how they did it, really understand, the house you live in will never look quite the same. The Ice Age survival toolkit is not what most people picture. It wasn't brute force, it wasn't luck, it was engineering, specific, layered, counterintuitive engineering that solved problems most modern people haven't even thought to ask. We're going to walk through 6 of those solutions, from the ground beneath their feet to the clothes on their bodies, and by the end, you'll see that the gap between them and you is smaller than you think, and bigger than you're comfortable with. Let's go. First, understand what they were actually fighting. At minus 40 degrees Celsius, a temperature that was normal across large parts of Ice Age Europe and Siberia, exposed human skin begins to freeze within minutes. Not hours, minutes. Your body responds by pulling blood away from your extremities toward your core, sacrificing fingers and toes to keep your heart running. If you fall asleep without shelter in that temperature, you don't wake up. That's not a dramatic framing. That's the physics. The cold at those temperatures isn't weather. It's a predator. It hunts continuously, it doesn't rest, and it kills faster than almost anything else your ancestors faced. Every solution they invented was an answer to one question: how do you defeat something that never stops attacking? The first answer came from under their feet. Archaeologists excavating sites in Russia and Central Europe kept finding something strange. Circular pits dug into the ground beneath ancient shelters, up to a meter deep, sometimes lined with ash and bone. For a while, the assumption was storage, food caches, graves, but the placement and design didn't fit those explanations. What those pits actually were is something your ancestors figured out empirically, without thermometers or physics textbooks, through trial and survival: geothermal insulation. The surface of the Earth during an Ice Age winter is as hostile as the air above it, frozen solid, a conductor of cold straight up into your body. But a meter down, the temperature of the Earth stabilizes. It doesn't mirror the air above. It holds at a relatively constant several degrees above freezing year-round, because the Earth's internal heat radiates slowly and steadily outward. Dig into it, and you've found a buffer. By sinking their shelters into the ground and lining the floor with insulating materials, animal hides, bark, compacted ash, they were essentially building a thermal floor. Not warm exactly, but dramatically less cold than the frozen surface above. The difference between sleeping on frozen ground and sleeping over a geothermal buffer at Ice Age temperatures is the difference between surviving the night and not. Modern Arctic engineering uses the same principle. Buildings in permafrost regions are deliberately elevated or insulated from the ground specifically to manage geothermal interaction. The physics your ancestors discovered by necessity is now standard cold climate construction practice. But the floor was only part of the problem. The walls were harder, and the solution they found for those came from the largest animals on Earth. No trees in the open tundra, no stone tools advanced enough to quarry rock efficiently, no lumber. What Ice Age humans on the Eurasian steppe had in abundance was something else: the bones of mammoths. Excavated sites in Ukraine and Russia, Mezhyrich, Mezin, Dobranichevka, have revealed the remains of shelters built almost entirely from mammoth bone, not randomly piled, engineered. The largest bones, the skulls and leg bones, formed the base ring. Ribs were lashed together in arching configurations to form the frame. Tusks, which can reach 3 meters in length, were used as structural arches and load-bearing supports. The most striking detail is the herringbone pattern found at several sites, mammoth jawbones interlocked in an alternating design along the base walls. This isn't aesthetics. Herringbone interlocking distributes lateral force across a structure, preventing collapse under pressure. It's the same principle used in bricklaying today. These people were applying structural engineering logic to mammoth bones in a landscape with no existing model to copy from. The completed shelters were then covered in hides, multiple layers, with the hair side facing inward to trap warm air, and weighted at the base with more heavy bones to prevent wind from getting underneath. Experiments with reconstructed mammoth bone shelters have found that even in extreme cold, a small fire inside can raise the interior temperature by 20 to 30 degrees Celsius above outside air. Not warm by modern standards. Survivable. Which was the entire point. The bones solved the structure. But a sealed shelter creates its own problem. One that killed people who built it wrong. A sealed shelter with a fire inside is not just a warm space. It's a slow accumulation of carbon monoxide and moisture. Breathe in a sealed space long enough, and the oxygen drops. The carbon monoxide from combustion rises. Moisture from breath and bodies condenses on cold surfaces, soaks through insulation, and reduces its effectiveness by up to 40%. A shelter that worked on night 1 can be significantly less effective by night 7 if moisture management is ignored. Ice Age sites show deliberate ventilation placement, small openings at specific points relative to the fire and the entrance, positioned to create airflow without allowing wind-driven heat loss. This isn't accidental, it's calculated. They were managing airflow in enclosed structures before anyone had words for ventilation or convection. They just knew that a shelter that didn't breathe right was a shelter that killed you slowly instead of the cold killing you fast. But none of this explains how they kept the fire alive in the first place, especially when wood was scarce. On the open steppe, wood was not always available. This is a practical problem that doesn't get enough attention. Fire is the center of Ice Age survival, but the fuel for fire was not a given. What Ice Age humans burned, and how, is one of the most counterintuitive chapters of their story. They burned bones, not as a last resort, deliberately. Bone contains fat, specifically the marrow fat in the interior of large bones, and fat burns. Bone marrow fat has a reasonable calorific value for sustained combustion, and split bones placed on an existing flame will sustain it significantly longer than many types of available wood. Multiple Ice Age hearth sites show the characteristic ash residue of bone combustion alongside animal remains. But the more sophisticated discovery was mammoth dung. Fresh dung won't burn. Dried dung, specifically the fibrous, plant-heavy dung of herbivores like mammoths, burns slowly at a sustained temperature for extended periods. It's not efficient, but it's steady, and steady was sometimes more valuable than hot. Dung combustion produces less dangerous buildup than bone fat at high temperatures, making it better suited for overnight fires in enclosed shelters where someone is sleeping. Evidence of dung combustion has been identified at multiple Ice Age sites through chemical analysis of hearth residues. They were, in other words, engineering their fuel selection around the specific use case: fast heat when needed, slow sustained burn for overnight survival, without any of the vocabulary we'd use to describe that reasoning. The fire was for the group, but the group was only part of the challenge. Individuals still had to move. Hunt. Cross open ground in temperatures that could kill an unprotected person in minutes. The oldest confirmed sewing needles found so far date to approximately 50,000 years ago. Small, thin, made of bone, with a drilled eye. The existence of a sewing needle implies something critical. Not just that people were using hides to cover themselves, but that they were cutting and joining material precisely. Tailoring. The distinction matters enormously. A hide draped over a body is insulation. A tailored garment, cut to fit, with sleeves that seal around the wrists, a hood that closes around the face, layers designed so the inner layer's warmth is not lost through gaps at the joints, is a system. The difference in thermal performance between a wrapped hide and a properly fitted layered garment is not marginal. It's the difference between surviving outside and not being able to stay outside at all. Analysis of Ice Age clothing evidence. Residue on needles. Structural inference from burial sites where body decoration and wear patterns are preserved suggests a layered approach. An inner layer worn with the hair against the skin to create an insulating air pocket, a middle layer for structural warmth, and an outer layer worn hair outward to shed wind and moisture. This is almost exactly the base layer, mid-layer, shell system recommended by modern cold-weather gear designers. They were not copying nature. They were analyzing it, understanding which properties of animal fur made it work, and replicating those properties in designed objects. That is not primitive thinking. That is applied materials science. And the needle, that small bone needle with its drilled eye, is one of the most quietly significant objects in human history. Every piece of winter gear you own traces its lineage back to it. Step back and look at what this actually is. People with no writing, no institutions, no accumulated textbooks of engineering knowledge, building geothermal floors, structurally sound bone frame shelters with herringbone load distribution, managed ventilation systems, differentiated fuel strategies, and layered tailored clothing that modern cold-weather gear designers still echo. None of this was inherited knowledge written down somewhere. Every generation had to rediscover it, refine it, pass it through story and demonstration and survival. The ones who got it wrong didn't survive to teach. The ones who got it right did, and you are here because an unbroken line of those people made it through winters that should have ended the species. The thermostat on your wall is not a replacement for that intelligence. It's a delegation of it. You've handed the problem to a machine so you don't have to think about it anymore, which is fine. But it means you have almost certainly never thought about warmth the way your ancestors had to. As a problem. As something you solve or die. They solved it. Every winter. For 300,000 years. Here's the one thing. The next time you're cold, not Ice Age cold, just ordinary cold, the kind where you reach for a blanket or turn up the heat, pause for 3 seconds before you do it. Don't reach for the thermostat immediately. Just notice, your body is running the same cold detection system that your ancestors ran. The sensation that makes you want warmth is the same signal that made them dig into the earth, stack mammoth bones, and stitch hides together by firelight. You're going to turn up the heat. That's fine. That's exactly what the technology is for. But you'll do it knowing that the discomfort you just felt for 3 seconds is the same discomfort that built every cold-weather survival innovation your species ever invented. The cold made them engineers. The warmth they built let them become everything else, including you. And if the engineering impresses you, wait until you hear what the fire actually did to the group sitting around it. Not just warmth, not just light. Something else happened at those Ice Age campfires that changed what it meant to be human. That one's next.